Okay, guys, let's get going. I want to welcome you to our regular Saturday afternoon sponsorship workshop. This is a regular meeting of the Pompano Beach group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Jim, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here today, and I'm glad to see all of you. Has everybody got a big book? Okay, good. Today we're going to be continuing our study of the first step and how to teach the first step. We conduct this workshop as an AA meeting with an abbreviated format in the interest of saving time. This workshop is an hour and a half in length. We take a 10-minute break at the halfway point. Please join me in a moment of silent meditation. We'll say the Serenity Prayer together. Thank you. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, and may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We're self-supporting to our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Not wish to engage in any controversy. Neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. All right, open your books up to page 30, please. You are probably looking at the 4th edition, and there are some paging differences, but not too many in the part that we use. Because the 4th edition has its forward, it changed the Roman numeral section by 2 pages, so that what used to start on page 26, that is the doctor's opinion, now starts on page, on 23 now, 24 starts on 26 now. There are a few other changes, but one of the things that was interesting to me, and this will interest some of you who've already used this, in the back of the book, in the 3rd edition, on page 552, we find the spiritual solution to resentments. And for some reason, that page hasn't changed, even though they've added a whole bunch of new stories. Still on page 552, which is good, because that way I won't have to change my memory. I can still refer to that page. Okay, on page 30, chapter 3, more about alcoholism. We're going to be talking about the first step today and where we find the first step in the big book. What is the material that your sponsee needs to be studying, and how do we go about helping them work their first step? First thing we have to understand in the second paragraph is that the definition of the first step in the big book does not include anything about unmanageability of our lives. And the reason for that's very simple. Many lives are unmanageable. In fact, I suppose most human beings, to one extent or another, have unmanageable lives, because since God has all power and all knowledge, the more we try to manage our lives, the less successful we seem to be. And so, as an indicia of alcoholism, the unmanageability of one's life has little or no meaning. The one thing about unmanageability that probably is important, is that it goes toward motivation. That is, the motivation to get sober, the motivation to begin to think in terms of powerlessness over alcohol. The first step obviously relates itself to our powerlessness over alcohol. The definition of an alcoholic is really pretty simple if we follow it all the way through. An alcoholic is one who has absolutely no power to stop drinking on their own willpower. It's one who has succumbed to the disease of alcoholism, which is a disease which is progressive, fatal, and incurable. Now, true alcoholics come in here in all shapes, sizes, forms, and degrees of alcohol addiction. But the one thing that remains a constant is that the chronic alcoholic cannot stop drinking, no matter how much they wish to do so, on their own. Big Book says, except for some brief periods of sobriety, which is usually true for most of us till we reach a certain point. Beyond that point, we don't even have those brief periods. Except for those few brief periods, alcohol has us by the throat, and so when we're faced with this fact of our lives that we cannot stop drinking, no matter how badly we want to, no matter how afraid we might be of the consequences, no matter how much we may know about ourselves, how much self-knowledge we may have, nevertheless, we cannot stop. No matter if we have been told we're going to die with the next drink, we will say, "Thank you very much, doctor," and walk across the street to the nearest bar and have that drink. And so when we look at alcoholism, we have to remember that alcoholism is in its essence is a form of insanity. That is to say, our minds don't work right. We no longer act in any rational sense when it comes to alcohol or the ingestion of alcohol. The fact that we're so disabled by alcohol and our lives have turned upside down, in some cases total disaster, just follows as day would follow night. So what we're really looking for here is this final concession to our innermost selves that we are indeed utterly powerless, that we are alcoholics by definition. And this is why the Big Book defines alcoholism, and the first step the way it does. We learned, it says. This learning process. If we're going to learn something, that means we need to study it. This is not just something that occurred to us one day. We learned. And to learn it, we need to do some work. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because the first step is not a passive step. A lot of people think it is, but it's not. The Big Book and the steps are set up so that each of the steps has to do with actions that we take. And as a sponsor, it would be your responsibility to see to it that these actions are taken, to help the newcomer to do what they need to do in order for this first step to take hold. So we're going to learn something. We're going to learn that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. That this is the first step in recovery. Now, you notice that this concession is without reservations of any kind. Fully concede to our innermost selves. This is not the surface stuff. This is nothing really to do with coming in here and saying, "My name is Jim, I'm an alcoholic." It may be that that's the truth, and it may not. But nevertheless, because everybody else does it, I'm going to repeat it. If I'm sitting here thinking, well, if I can just get my job back, if I can just get my family back, if I can just get the courts off my back, if I can get my car back, if I can get my health back, then after that, I should be able to have a drink now and then. I mean, there's no reason in the world why I shouldn't. The only reason I was getting drunk is because my life was such a mess. And that's what they were telling me, that your life was unmanageable and therefore you drank. You see the danger in this. The fact is that our lives are unmanageable by us anyway, But they just got further and further out of control because of our drinking. It wasn't the other way around. And so there has to be this concession. Conceding means defeat. Conceding means giving up absolutely. In the Second World War, the United States demanded of Germany, of Italy, and of Japan unconditional surrender. There weren't going to be any peace treaties that granted any kind of concessions whatsoever to those countries. And so when the Japanese ambassador met with General MacArthur on the fantail of the battleship USS Missouri, he signed away Japan. Unconditional surrender. Think about that when you think about the first step. Unconditional surrender. Giving up without reservations of any kind whatsoever. In other words, concession, conceding, surrendering without reservations, surrendering absolutely, surrendering unconditionally. Knowing in our innermost selves that we're alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And if you understand that, then when you're working with your new people, you'll be able to more completely advise them as to what needs to happen here. Now, one of the things that we become aware of, and I'm sure all of you have seen this, is the person who is a member here and who is not doing well, and perhaps has been in and out, in and out, in and out, laughs and jokes about picking up all the white chips. And you wonder what's going on here. Well, it isn't too difficult. If you can sit those people down and really get them to admit what's going on, you'll find in almost every case that there's been no full concession to the powerlessness, and there's been no unconditional surrender. And lurking in the back of their minds is the idea that somehow they're going to be able to take a drink again, to go back and be able to enjoy drinking as they once did, to be able to feel the sense of release that alcohol gave, to be able to be freed by alcohol from their fears and anxieties and worries, because that's what alcohol did. And the memory that we carry so often is the memory of whatever we used to think of as the good times. We romanticize the alcohol. And one of the things, too, we have to remember with a new person is that their survival mechanism, all the survival mechanisms they have left in life are centered around alcohol. And so it is not, you'd have to be blind and deaf, dumb, and stupid not to understand that so many people sit in these rooms with reservations. And I promise you that these are folks who do not recover. And if you look around you, it's not going to happen in this meeting, because the people who come here are completely dedicated to recovery. I mean, you wouldn't be here on a Saturday afternoon if you weren't. That's what these workshops always do. They boil down to those few who really care about their own recovery and their own program. And that's fine, because you're the ones that are going to go out and carry this message. And you're the ones who will survive. And you're the ones who will be doing God's work out there as you were intended to do. But if you look around the meeting tonight, half the people in that room will not be there next year. And in 2 years, only 30% will be left. And in 5 years, maybe 15% or 10%. And you ask yourself, why? Well, this is a very simple program, but it's very difficult to do because it runs directly against our own human nature. Our human nature is to be self-centered. To stay out of self and to stay centered on God's work is just something which does not seem to be doable for so many folks. That's why the big book tells us that we're undisciplined and that we have to let God discipline us. Because if we don't, we slip right back out. Now the next sentence, the delusion that we are like other people or presently may be, has to be smashed. That ought to be clear enough. Smashed. What part of smashed don't you understand? That means squashed, gone, finito, out of here. Because if there is a lingering hope, a lingering belief that somehow we're going to be able to get past all of this and get back to normal drinking, we're dead ducks. So you do the best you can as a sponsor to make sure that this first step has in fact taken hold. Now, there's no way for us to x-ray minds, but we must make a major point of this. Go back to page Romans 27. XXVII. Dr. Silkworth set it out for us, the fifth line down in that first paragraph. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Period. That's it. And that's the only place in the big book where that statement is made, and it's really the only place in the big book where it's implied that we have to stop drinking. Because otherwise the big book doesn't talk about drinking at all, except in the abstract. It talks about finding a spiritual solution to our problem. The big book is not going to, it was being inspired work, it does not dwell on things which are impossible. And it is an impossibility for the chronic alcoholic to stop drinking. That's exactly why we're here. So for us to tell our sponsees, or for the big book to tell them stop drinking, is a waste of time. That's exactly why we're here, because we can't stop drinking. Go over to page 31. I know we covered this last week, but I want to make sure that we all are on the same page here. Page 31 again, first full paragraph. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they are in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. Okay, now that's the problem. That's the problem of the first step. Is this the lurking notion that somehow someday we can drink again with impunity. So how do we as sponsors get our newcomers past this? Please believe me when I tell you that it is utterly useless to have them fill out a 400-question questionnaire about unmanageability. It is worse than useless to have them fill out a personality profile. It is even worse to expect that by psychoanalyzing them, we're going to get them to stop. And the worst of all is that they're going to stop because we load them up with pills or shots. Now, all of these things are being done today, and where they are being done without reference to a spiritual program of action, the recidivism rate is 100%. Now, there's going to be the occasional sport being the odd person out, the exception which proves the rule. Maybe 1 out of 10,000 people actually can stop on their own because they get religion or they take the pledge or whatever. But other than that, for the rest of us, because, listen to this now, this is the important thing, because we are powerless over alcohol, because it has us by the throat, nothing that is done to us or with us is going to protect us from the obsession and the compulsion to drink. we may be just scared to death of the next drunk. And people are always talking around here about keeping it green and don't forget your next drunk. If you can't remember your next drunk, you haven't had it. It's all utter nonsense. I mean, it sounds good. The problem is that it implies that our fear of the consequences of getting drunk will keep us sober, and that's not true. It simply is not true. One thing that it does accomplish, perhaps, is to motivate us to do our work, and if it does that, then I would say, great. But that's not the import of these sayings that we have. We just, as sponsors, we don't want to indulge in this because we have to be consistent or we're going to lose our people. If we're not consistent across the board with what we teach and what we practice ourselves, people get confused. And I know because I deal with confused alcoholics all the time who've they've been up one garden path after another. They haven't the foggiest idea what the hell they're supposed to be doing. With some really screwy ideas about recovery. Well, now then, if we're going to, if the first step is going to happen, it's going to happen because there is work that we do, not because we wish for it, not because we're psychoanalyzed, not because we come to meetings and the old saying, you bring the body and the mind will follow. That's another bunch of nonsense. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, but so what? We're not looking here for easier, softer ways, for panaceas. This is not take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. Take two chapters of the Big Book and call me in the morning. We're looking, because alcoholism itself is a deadly disease, we're talking about an absolute here. The death is an absolute in terms of our human lives, of course. And so if we're going to be dealing with an absolute on one side, we need something which is equally strong or stronger on the other side. And the absolute we're dealing with here is a loving God and the power of a loving God. But before we ever get to that, we've got our newcomer has the problem of coming to conclusion on their own that they are powerless over alcohol, and that the plug is in the jug forever. Okay. So therefore, there are 4 actions that we take and that we teach. First, read the book. Read the whole book. Turn to page 95. We've been over this before, but I want to tie this all together now. As we studied the Big Book, we went through some of these things. Well, let's see now how this all comes together. Set the stage. You've got somebody brand new you're working with. And you've already told them your story about how you drank and how you tried to stop. And you told them about the disease, and you've told them about how you recovered. And you've told them a little bit about the fellowship and how this all works. And now you've come to the moment of truth, the 3rd full paragraph on page 95. After all of this that you've done, the person is still sitting there in front of you. If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. Please notice that there is no modifier to that phrase, this book. It does not say half of this book or the first 164 pages of this book or the first 3 chapters of this book or selected paragraphs in accordance with the list which I am handing you of this book. This is not as my sponsor sees it. This is the book. Now there are very, very, very powerful, good reasons for the newcomer to do this. After doing that, it says, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. Please notice again that this does not say that the newcomer has, by virtue of reading the book, worked the first step. This is a little step-by-step process here of getting the newcomer from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial to a place of interest and willingness to go forward. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. Very important for us to understand that. There is only so much that we can do. Sooner or later, this is going to come down to the desire and the willingness and the motivation and the desperation of the newcomer, none of which we can supply in any great measure. Motivation, perhaps a little bit. The most important thing that we're doing right from here on is every time that newcomer sees us or talks to us, we want to be sure that we are an example to him or to her of God's power working in our lives. In other words, that the third step prayer has been activated, that he or she can see God working in and through us, can see us actually living a spiritual way of life, a principled, moral, ethical way of life. Because that example is going to have more power and more influence with a newcomer than anything we could possibly say. The big book was written for the newcomer. Please understand that. The initial and purpose of writing this book was that it go out to those who had no groups, no word of mouth. There was that had nothing to go by, and they had decided that they must write a book detailing their experiences with recovery in order for them to be able to much more quickly spread the message. Remember that when the decision was made to write this book, they only had 100 members in 3 little groups, and they hadn't grown all that much. But they knew they were onto something. They knew that what they had was so valuable that they had to find a different way to get it out. They couldn't do it by word of mouth and by personal meetings. And so they decided to write the book. And in this book, they decided to put everything that would be necessary for a new person to read and to assimilate in order for them to get a start. There are 2 things which had to happen and must happen with each new person you work with. The first is that they must overcome and break down the walls of their own denial. The denial of their alcoholism. The denial of the fact that they must put the plug in the jug for good and all. The denial of the fact that they are not functioning well, that their minds don't work, that they are powerless. Denial of all these things. That's what denial means. I'm okay. I just drink a little too much, and if I didn't have such a lousy wife, I wouldn't even do that. And my kids are brats. My boss is a rotten ogre, and I owe a lot of money. And all my friends are down there at the bar. What do you expect? Those are the people I want to be with. If there's a football game on, I don't want to sit around stupid house, the dog scratching his fleas and the kid screaming, yelling, the old lady trying to get me to take out the garbage. I'm going down to the bar where my friends are. Now, sure, I have a few drinks down there. Sometimes I stagger home a little bit. Once in a while I lose the car or my keys or even lose my lunch. So what? Everybody does that. We all can identify with this kind of denial. And it's got to be broken down and taken away. That's what the big book was written to do. if you want this new person to recover, the first thing that has to happen is we got to get past that denial. Otherwise, why in the world would they listen to us or want to do anything at all? As long as they're still denying the existence of any problem, they have absolutely no reason to go any further with us. And the other reason that the big book was written was so that this person whose denial is broken down will likewise be helped past what the big book describes as a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. In other words, to put it very simply, to bring hope to a hopeless person. Those who have reached that stage of total desperation, in almost every case, are without hope of recovery. They have tried everything they can think of themselves and nothing worked. And in most cases these days, they've already worn out 4 treatment centers, 16 detoxes, and 7 jailers around town. And every judge hates to see them walk in. And if they're on the highway, you get off the highway. And so when they come in the door finally, hopelessness is their lot. And this book is designed to bring them hope. Think about it. Every story in this book is a story of recovery. Every single story is a story of recovery. Every intendment in this book, every emphasis in this book is an emphasis on recovery. None of it is how you don't do it, it's all how you do it. When they say to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this volume, that's what they mean. This is a book of recovery, and therefore it is a book which brings hope to the new person. Make no mistake about it, the book is to be read right up front. There's an added advantage, an added bonus for we who are sponsors. Some of you haven't sponsored yet, but you will be if you stick around. And if you aren't, you won't stick around. There's an added bonus. You want to know whether somebody who comes in and approaches you for help or you approach to help them is serious? You want to know whether they're just a tire kicker, or they're here to get the judge off their back, or the wife off their back, or the whoever, escape creditors, escape reality, with no real intention of doing anything about it except to hide out for a while. You want to know about them so you don't waste your time? It's simple. Give them the book and tell them to read it. And the person who reads that book, you can be relatively certain is a candidate for recovery. The person who drags their feet and refuses to read it has every excuse in the world, or immediately goes out and finds another sponsor who won't make them read the book. And you have a pretty good idea what the problem there is, and that there's not going to be much chance of recovery. One of the things the big book tells us is that we don't waste our time on people who cannot or will not work with us. Not only that, but I suppose the best reason of all to have them read the book is that's what the book says about itself. Go to page 96. Second full paragraph. Suppose now you are making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Now again, you find the word "this" and coupled with volume. What part of this don't we understand? Read this whole book. And says he's prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. He's decided he wants what we have. And he's willing to go to any length to get it. It's just another way of saying what we read every day in chapter 5. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story. Now that's just a euphemism. Making a decision and telling a story is a euphemism for working the steps. Let him know that you're available if he wishes to work the steps, but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. Please notice that the Big Book instructs us to take the new person to the steps immediately. Second meeting. Now I suppose that there are variations on this theme, but let's consider the import of this rather than the finite details. The import of this is that they're reporting to us how they recovered, and how they recovered was that they went immediately to the steps. Dr. Bob would have the new person who just walked in the door up in his study that night on his knees praying, and be helping him immediately with the steps. This is before the Big Book was written. So this is the way they did it, and they recovered, and they're trying to tell us, listen guys, this is the way we recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. These are the things we did, and we believe that because they worked for us, they'll work for you. That's what they're telling us, and of course they're right. Now then, we have to consider what is taking place between the first and second visit. What is taking place during the time that the newcomer is actually reading the book?